Hey guys, tonight we are going to unveil a historical secret that has been buried for more than 400 years. A story hidden behind the glorious facade of one of the greatest dynasties in history, specifically the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Have you ever wondered if what we're taught in textbooks is the whole truth? One night, in the shadows of Richmond Palace, three people stood before a horrific secret. A secret powerful enough to shake the foundations of a monarchy. What they discovered was not just the death of a monarch, but evidence of something far more sinister. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Before we begin, please take a few seconds in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the hush before the pale light of dawn on the 24th of March, 1603, three of Queen Elizabeth's most trusted confidants assembled within the dimly lit chambers of Richmond Palace. Their breathing was soft, each exhalation mingling with the faint scent of wax candles and perfumed oils that still lingered in the air. Sworn to an oath of unbroken secrecy, they approached with reverent caution the form that had lain concealed beneath layers of finery for nearly half a century. Under the careful guidance of the chief attendant, they began to peel away the sumptuous gowns that had once draped the Virgin Queen in an aura of unblemished purity. Silk and velvet fell in soft folds to the floor, revealing next a structure of steel and whalebone corsetry so rigid and unyielding that it must have pressed against her ribs like a vice. With each snap of a hook and each soft rustle of removal, the atmosphere grew heavier, as though the palace walls themselves were leaning in to witness the unmasking. Their hearts trembled when, at last, the thick layers of Venetian ceruse were carefully wiped away. Beneath the chalk-white facade lay not the smooth alabaster skin of legend, but a visage long ravaged by lead poisoning. Deep pockmarks and patches of darkened flesh marred what remained of her once regal complexion. Fine webbing of black veins crept like shadows beneath loose strips of peeling skin. A stifled gasp escaped one observer as he lifted a length of the corset's steel stays from her collapsed form. The sharp edge had cut into the flesh, leaving ragged tears that oozed a thick tar-black ichor. The smell was metallic and pungent, stinging the nostrils and clinging to the memory of those present. They watched, helpless, as the brittle bones of her ribcage, long misshapen by relentless compression, released a soft crackle when freed. Next came the unveiling of her torso. Where once smooth curves had been guided by artful tailoring, now lay cavity after cavity of decayed tissue. Small holes perforated the remnants of muscle, as though the very life had eroded from within. Dark Mass's organs, blackened and shrunken, spoke of decades spent under the cruel regimen of tight lacing and toxic cosmetics. Every breath she had drawn, every movement she had made, had been under the siege of these poisons and devices. Then came the most horrifying revelation of all. Within the hollowed expanse of her chest, tucked beside a heart that still bore the faint semblance of its former shape, they discovered a second grotesque mass. The tumour, the size of a hen's egg, pulsed softly, with a sickly life of its own. On closer inspection, it contained strands of coarse hair and fragments of tooth-like matter, as if her own body had rebelled by creating this monstrous twin. No scholar of anatomy could have named it. No medical text of the age could have prepared them for such abomination. In that hushed moment, the three witnesses, Dr. Richard Manningham, Lady Helena Snakenborg, and an unnamed royal minister, stood speechless before the ultimate cost of Elizabeth's political theatre. For 4 long decades, the Queen had hidden behind a mask of powdered purity and a rigid frame of corseted steel. She had transformed her flesh into a spectacle of power, sacrificing her health, her comfort, and ultimately her humanity, to reinforce her divine right, and to thwart any suitor who might claim the English throne. No word was spoken as they replaced her tattered garments and closed the coffin. The oath of silence took on a new gravity. Any whisper of these horrors would be met, not with mercy, but with death. Within days, their names so prominent in courtly circles would vanish from records, erased as completely as the truth they had witnessed. As the first rays of dawn finally slipped through the narrow window slits, they departed in separate directions, each carrying the unimagined burden of this gruesome secret. Behind them, Richmond Palace seemed to exhale, releasing what little air had remained trapped in its stone corridors. And though the world would believe the Virgin Queen to have passed peacefully in her sleep, it was these three who knew the terrible price of her guiding hand. A body crushed by ambition, corroded by poison, and immortalized as an emblem of power, more enduring than life itself. It was in the early 1530s, when young Princess Elizabeth was but 3 years old, that the first tremors of her future transformation were set in motion. On a cold autumn morning, she watched with wide, fearful eyes as her beloved mother, Princess Anne Boleyn, was led to the block amidst charges that were cruelly fabricated. King Henry VIII, desperate for a male heir, had discarded Anne as one might cast aside a worn garment, replacing her with another bride in swift succession. This moment, seared indelibly into Elizabeth's memory, taught her that the female body could be wielded as both a blade and a vulnerability, a dual-edged instrument of power and peril. In the years that followed, Elizabeth began what would become a lifelong metamorphosis of the flesh. At dawn each day, her attendants would gather the lead-based white ceruse used by Venetian courtesans, paint layered upon layer, until her features vanished beneath a ghostly mask. Beneath heavy silken gowns, a corset of steel, whalebone, and wood was drawn tight around her torso, sculpting her figure into the idealized silhouette of the perpetual Virgin Queen. Petticoats and farthingales multiplied, creating voluminous skirts that turned her into a living statue, visible from afar yet well protected from any close scrutiny. Morning rituals stretched for hours, each delicate brushstroke of powdered lead bolstering the illusion of alabaster purity. Mirrors within her private chambers were forbidden, deemed too perilous for Elizabeth's fragile secret. Instead, she glimpsed her reflection only in shards of broken glass, a fragmented reminder that the sovereign appearance was but a carefully constructed stage. Thus armoured in both pigment and rigidity, she fashioned a persona meant to inspire awe and, perhaps, fear. The year 1558 marked a turning point. At the age of 25, Elizabeth ascended the English throne and immediately grasped that her proclaimed virginity could serve as more than mere virtue it was to be her political lodestar. By vowing to remain unwed, she prevented the crown from passing into the hands of any husband, thereby consolidating ultimate authority in her own person. Every treaty signed, every ambassador received, every law enacted flowed directly from her will, without the complications of dynastic marriage. In so doing, she sidestepped the fate of her mother and sisters, whose fortunes rose and fell with their marriages. Yet beneath this strategic mastery lay an undercurrent of personal dread. Whispers in clandestine letters and stolen journal pages alluded to an unspecified impediment, a bodily truth that made marriage impossible. Some accounts spoke of an unspoken deformity. Others implied a more startling secret. These furtive records were repeatedly hunted down and destroyed by agents of the court, as though the mere existence of such doubts could unravel the tapestry of Elizabeth's reign. Thus, the lead-encrusted visage and the constricting steel cage of her corset doubled as shields, obscuring whatever private reality she feared to reveal. Political astuteness and personal anxiety merged in the design of her public image. The Virgin Queen became an icon of England's Protestant resolve, her frozen whiteness a symbol of purity and incorruptible strength. Yet the very tools she employed, layers of toxic cosmetics and bones, forced into unsettling shapes, slowly assaulted her flesh from within. Over time, the court physicians began to note odd symptoms: fatigue unrelieved by rest, tremors in her hands, occasional lapses of memory. But such observations were buried beneath official reports that spoke only of occasional indisposition due to the burdens of state. In letters to confidants, Elizabeth sometimes referenced the barrier within, a phrase that hinted at more than mere modesty. She described an obstacle that rendered the prospect of marriage unthinkable. Yet she never elaborated, and those who asked were met with icy silence or sudden dismissal. Over the decades, the rumour mill churned with speculation from tales of injury in childhood to lurid suggestions of congenital anomaly, but none dared to commit these theories to print. By the time her 40th birthday arrived, Elizabeth's stagecraft was absolute. Even as her subjects cheered her unwavering countenance, no one could see the price exacted upon her body. Each layer of ceruse, each girdle of bone and steel, reinforced the political edifice she had erected. Yet in private chambers, she sat alone, the mask heavy upon her skin, the corset's grip relentless. and the secret she guarded as tightly as the crown unsettlingly close to the surface of her being. Thus, the tale of Elizabeth's early years reveals not merely the forging of a ruler, but the making of a myth, a woman who, by mastering the art of concealment, transcended the very frailties of flesh, transforming herself into the eternal Virgin Queen. And yet beneath that frozen veneer, the costs of such power lay hidden, waiting for the day when the layers would be stripped away, and the secret long buried would at last be laid bare. The passage of 2 decades saw the toll of time and toxins etched ever more clearly upon Queen Elizabeth's once pristine countenance. Underneath the layers of lead-based makeup, her skin began to collapse inward, revealing pockmarks and dark lesions where the ceruse had corroded living flesh. Small perforations appeared like pinpricks across her cheeks and forehead, the raw edges oozing a thin, yellowish fluid that stained the fine linens beneath. Her teeth, long subjected to chronic lead exposure, blackened and cracked, loosening one by one, until speaking became a source of shame. In private chambers, she learned to cover her mouth with a silken handkerchief before uttering a word, lest any fortunate observer glimpse the ghastly gaps and shattered shards. Even her hair, once a golden wave, thinned in ragged patches, forcing her to don elaborate wigs that grew heavier and more cumbersome with each appearance. Those wigs, adorned with jewels, plumes and veils, concealed only what they did not worsen. The relentless weight pressed sores into her scalp, producing yet more wounds that refused to heal. Beneath the sumptuous fabrics of her gowns, Elizabeth's body seethed with hidden rot. The linings of her underclothes, dyed with arsenic-laden pigments and stiffened by mercury salts, irritated the festering ulcers along her torso and limbs. Belladonna eye drops meant to enlarge and darken her gaze had become a cruel irony, for the toxic alkaloids damaged her optic nerves, resulting in blurred vision and frequent eye pain. In dimly lit council rooms, she sometimes wore a delicate eye patch, a silent testament to the cost of preserving her mesmerizing stare. As the decade of 1590 dawned, every public appearance became an elaborate ritualistic performance. It required 3 to 4 hours of meticulous preparation, attendants powdering her face with fresh layers of ceruse, lacing her corset until her waist seemed impossibly narrow, arranging petticoats and farthingales to create the iconic bell-shaped silhouette. Wigs were coiffed and scented, jeweled pins securing them in place. Courtiers awaited beyond the antechamber, instructed to stand at a respectful distance so that none might glimpse her constricted breathing or see the subtle tremor in her hands. Court physicians kept secret journals documenting her plight. They recorded the swellings of her joints, the red-hot abscesses along her hips, and the constant use of leech therapy to draw out corrupted humours. They administered repeated purges and enemata, believing that ridding her system of impure fluids would restore her vigour. Yet each treatment left her weakened, her strength dwindling until she felt as if her soul were her only unwavering support. Despite these horrors, the facade of the Virgin Queen remained unblemished before her subjects. Even in council, when diplomats bowed and nobles knelt, Elizabeth's posture was unyielding, her eyes steady although behind her mask of powdered innocence, her mind sometimes drifted into uneasy reverie. On rare occasions, she would lapse into delirious soliloquy, her voice trembling as she spoke softly to visions of her mother, Anne Boleyn, as if the past and present were entwined in her fevered dreams. Such episodes of mental disturbance grew more frequent. Some nights she roamed the palace corridors in a half-sleep, calling for a daughter who had never existed. On other evenings, she would stare into the soot-black hearth, murmuring about distant fields of amber wheat where she played as a child. Each time, her attendants gently guided her back to her chamber, adjusting her ruffled gown and offering herbal draughts laced with calming violets and lavender. By the late 1590s, the Privy Council devised a remarkable stratagem to preserve the illusion of unbroken sovereignty, the employment of royal doubles. When Elizabeth's constitution failed her, a lady-in-waiting or a trusted lady companion would don a simplified version of the Queen's attire, matching the colour scheme of the gown and wearing a smaller, less opulent wig, and stand in her place during brief audiences. Observers, positioned at precisely the right angle, saw only a graceful silhouette and heard a voice reciting pre-approved phrases. Thus, continuity of governance was maintained even when the true queen lay prostrate in her bedchamber, too weak or delirious to rule. And so the ritual of concealment deepened, each cough echoing through the palace, each hidden wound, each fevered dream was tucked away behind layers of fabric, pigment, and ceremony. The Virgin Queen, once the embodiment of Protestant virtue and national pride, existed now as both sovereign and spectre, a figurehead sustained by the most intricate artifice, her authority preserved even as her body unravelled. In the hush of her private boudoir, where candlelight cast gentle shadows on gilded walls, Elizabeth's solitary sigh carried the weight of 2 decades' worth of sacrifice, a reminder that the price of power, once steep, could grow ever more exacting with each passing year. Winter of 1602 settled over the palace with unforgiving chill, and Queen Elizabeth's body began to betray her more visibly than ever before. Her legs, once encased in silken hose and boots of fine leather, were now veiled in layers of bespoke smocks designed to conceal festering, necrotic ulcers that oozed a dark, viscous fluid. The stench, acrid, metallic, and utterly inescapable, drew attendants to burn bundles of aromatic herbs by the hearth day and night, their smoke curling into every corner to mask the putrid odour. In these hushed corridors, her servants moved with quiet reverence, ever vigilant of the restless sighs that escaped her lips. Beneath the heavy garments that concealed her declining flesh, Elizabeth had lost all control over her bodily functions. Custom-fitted undergarments, reinforced with discreet layers of cloth, bound her with merciless precision, both to maintain her stately silhouette and to hide the humiliating episodes that no sovereign must endure in public sight. Despite these contrivances, the physical strain grew intolerable. Her breathing became shallow and ragged, each inhalation a reminder of the corset's unrelenting grip. Near the end of March of 1603, during a fierce bout of illness that had been gathering strength for weeks, Elizabeth suffered a violent seizure lasting nearly 1 hour. In her private chamber, attended by Dr. Richard Manningham, she convulsed upon the crimson damask bedspread, foam flecked with blood spilling from her lips. Her body arched in anguished arcs, her limbs flailing as though seized by invisible chains. The candlelight wavered in the draughty room, casting ghostly shadows that danced upon the vaulted ceiling. Those who witnessed the scene stood transfixed by dread, for it seemed as if the very life was being wrung from her mortal frame. When she finally regained consciousness, her eyes, once so commanding, held only fleeting clarity. Leaning toward Dr. Manningham, she whispered in a voice barely more than a breath, "I bear an iron chain about my neck," before collapsing back into a haze of pain and exhaustion. With solemn urgency, the 3 confidants, Manningham, Lady Helena Snakenborg, and an unnamed royal minister, prepared for the most harrowing task, a clandestine post-mortem examination. As they laid Elizabeth's still form upon the examination table, they uncovered a tumour the size of a goose's egg, nestled in the left thoracic cavity. Its surface was a deep, violet-black hue, and when incised, it yielded a stream of tar-like blood, heavy with the scent of rusted iron. Within its core lay grotesque fragments of hair and teeth, clear markers of a teratoma. Their horror deepened when they discovered a second cardiac mass, a malformed echo of the true heart, and patches of tissue so aberrant that no anatomical treatise of the age could account for them. Small clusters of nodular growths protruded from her ribs, and soft, translucent membranes seemed to pulse independently, as though harbouring a life apart from the monarch who had borne them for decades. No physician had ever encountered such anomalies. It was as if Elizabeth's body had become a chamber of curiosities, a living testament to the cruelty of her self-enforced regimen of lead cosmetics and steel corsetry. Faced with this unthinkable spectacle, the Privy Council moved swiftly to suppress all evidence. The Queen's body was wrapped in multiple layers of linen and canvas, bound tightly to absorb any further leakage, then lowered into a leaden coffin, specially cast for the purpose. The lid was sealed at once with molten lead, ensuring that no air or even rumour of the horrors within might escape. There was to be no death mask, no public display of her visage in its final state. No ceremonial lying in state would permit any glimpse of her ravaged form. The very scene of the examination was purged of all trace. The chamber's floorboards were removed and replaced, and frescoed walls were whitewashed to obliterate the memory of vials and whispers. Medical records, notes, and personal letters that referenced her condition, or the examination, were gathered into iron chests and consigned to flames. Even the smallest scrap of paper bearing her name was consumed, sending up choking plumes that mingled with the smoke of the medicinal herbs still burning in the corridors. In the days that followed, the 3 witnesses were dispatched to the far corners of the realm. Dr. Manningham was sent to Scotland under a false identity, his medical instruments hidden beneath the folds of his robes. Lady Snakenborg entered a convent under strict vow of silence, her lips sealed as tightly as the coffin in Westminster. The unnamed minister vanished altogether, his existence expunged from court records as though he had never drawn breath. Thus did the terrible secret of Elizabeth's final hours vanish into the annals of forgotten history. No official chronicle dared to speak of the tumorous masses or the monster heart. Rumours persisted, whispered in dim taverns or over candlelit suppers, but they were dismissed as the fevered fantasies of over-imaginative clerks and disgruntled courtiers, and so the truth remained buried, sealed by leaden silence, waiting for centuries before any light of discovery would dare approach its shadowed tomb. It was this very act of concealment that gave rise to the most shocking question of all. Was Elizabeth truly a woman? Beneath the lavish veils of silk and brocade, beneath the layers of ceruse and the constricting steel and whalebone corset, lay evidence that defied every assumption of anatomy. During the clandestine examination, Dr. Richard Manningham recorded in hushed Latin entries of an organ not of the same kind, describing genital structures that combined traditionally female and male characteristics. He spoke of tissue that seemed neither wholly ovary nor testis, of external features blurred and ambiguous, suggesting a disorder of sexual development unimagined by 16th century medicine. The disfigurements did not end there. The ribs, already deformed by decades of tight lacing, were found warped into impossible curves, some fused by scar tissue, others fractured and partially healed. In the hollows where solid bone should lie, he discovered soft, translucent membranes pulsing with a life of their own. Sections of skin peeled away effortlessly, revealing networks of vessels that formed a latticework entirely unfamiliar to any anatomist's chart. He wrote of strange organs that seemed grafted onto her body, as if her form had become a living collage of conflicting tissues. Such revelations, if made public, threatened to shatter the foundation of the Protestant English monarchy. Elizabeth's rule had been justified by her image as the Virgin Queen, consecrated by God and untouched by earthly bonds of marriage. If her very identity were in question, if the figure who had signed every decree, led every army, and shaped the destiny of England were not wholly female, then every law she had enacted, every alliance she had forged, and every triumph she had claimed might be declared illegitimate. There was the further spectre of the Bisley Boy legend, the rumour that as a child Elizabeth had been swapped for a brother, a male heir secretly raised in royal guise. Should such whispers gain credence, the Protestant settlement she had built could crumble overnight, emboldening Catholic factions to rally for a new sovereign, perhaps even igniting civil war. Thus, the Privy Council decreed that all traces of the examination be sealed away. Elizabeth's body was placed into a second coffin, this one lined with mercury-coated fabric and bound in iron chains. It was then encased in thick sheets of lead, the seams soldered shut, ensuring no air or rodent could penetrate. Above ground, a modest tombstone proclaimed simply that Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen of England, France, and Ireland, defender of the faith, had passed peacefully. No mention of her body's true state, no death mask to memorialize her visage, no public viewing, nothing to betray the horrors concealed within. All medical notes, letters, and personal diaries relating to her condition or to the post-mortem findings were gathered and burned in a great pyre behind the palace walls. Witnesses' testimonies were reduced to ash. Even the memory of those final hours was systematically erased. Courtiers who had brushed too close in sympathy were reassigned to distant estates. Servants who had cared for her ulcers or adjusted her corset were granted generous pensions and then quietly dismissed. In time, their names faded from the court rolls, their contributions expunged as thoroughly as the documents they once guarded. For centuries thereafter, the reign of the Virgin Queen was celebrated in glowing annals and painted portraits that depicted her as the epitome of chastity and command. Gloriana, the Phoenix of England, rose from every canvas with unblemished complexion, serene countenance, and skirts billowing in imagined winds of glory. The darker truths lay buried beneath layers of statecraft and legend surviving only in whispers among antiquarians and the occasional marginal note in a forgotten manuscript. It was not until the 20th century that fragments of those secret records began to surface. A trove of charred fragments discovered in a private archive outside London contained translations of Manningham's cryptic Latin entries, a motley collection of correspondence, long presumed destroyed, emerged in the hands of a reclusive scholar who had inherited papers from a great-grandnephew of Lady Helena Snakenborg. These documents, pieced together through painstaking forensic analysis, hinted at the grotesque anomalies that had been concealed in lead and silence. Even so, professional historians treated these revelations with caution, fearing that sensational claims might overshadow Elizabeth's political and cultural achievements. Yet the very existence of those marginalia references to a demon body and double heart served as a haunting reminder of the lengths to which power will go to protect its narrative. The case of Elizabeth's hidden anatomy has come to stand among the most chilling medical conspiracies in history, a cautionary tale of how a woman's body was both weapon and sacrifice in the service of a crown. And so, despite the ravages she endured, the Virgin Queen endures. Her legend, forged through ritual and craft, remains impervious to the truth of her private suffering. The silken skirts, the powdered mask, the iron corset, all serve to create an icon of unassailable authority. Yet behind that gleaming facade lay a body broken beyond measure, a testament to a reign sustained by relentless artifice. In the end, the greatest victory of Elizabeth's mystique was the preservation of her myth, a sovereign untouched, unsullied, and forever beyond the reach of earthly frailty. After the Queen's body had been placed within the first leaden coffin, the Privy Council and its appointed medical board determined that further measures were necessary to ensure that no whisper of the horrors beneath her silken shrouds might ever escape. Thus was decreed the creation of a second, even more impenetrable casket, its interior lined with silvered mercury, its exterior sheathed in thick iron bands that bore heavy chains coiled about them like sleeping serpents. Every seam was soldered with molten lead, sealing shut even the smallest fissure through which air or rumour might pass. On the eve of this grim undertaking, Dr. Richard Manningham, Lady Helena Snakenborg, and the unnamed royal minister who had borne witness to the Queen's final revelations were each summoned to separate, shadowed chambers. No longer could they confer or trade confidences. Their voices must not mingle, their memories must not align. Manningham was dispatched northwards beyond the border, under a false name and accompanied only by a small retinue of silent attendants. There, in the misty highlands of Scotland, he was instructed to take up a new post, his medical instruments discreetly concealed beneath his cloak. Lady Snakenborg found herself in an austere convent cloister, where vows of silence bound her lips more tightly than any corset had bound her mistress's ribs. The third witness simply vanished, as though he had been spirited away by the very shadows he once traversed, leaving behind neither record nor epitaph. Meanwhile, the palace itself was transformed into a theatre of erasure. Every scrap of parchment, every leather-bound journal and rolled scroll that might contain a reference to Elizabeth's waning health, her grotesque tumorous growths, or the post-mortem findings, was gathered into great iron cauldrons. By the dim light of 100 torches, scribes dumped the pages into roaring flames, their crackling animating the vaulted hall with greying wisps of ash. The chamber where the examinations had taken place was deftly dismantled, floorboards lifted, splintered, and replaced with fresh timber, walls whitewashed to obliterate any hint of crimson splatter, surgical tools, knives, hooks, forceps collected and consigned to the same purifying fire as the documents. Even the tiniest scrap of cloth stained with blood was burned, ensuring that no vestige of the demon body might linger in the world of men. In the days that followed, an official account of the Queen's passing was compiled, polished until it gleamed with the serenity of a carefully crafted dream. According to this refined narrative, Her Majesty had succumbed to a gentle fever after a brief indisposition. No mention was made of corsetry or ceruse, of mercury or lead, of necrosis or necrotic tumours. Midnight vigils were portrayed instead as solemn prayers for her peaceful rest, and the household surgeon's notes, purged of any hint of irregularity, recorded only symptoms typical of advanced age, and a frailty that rendered her wearied by the weight of sovereignty. This sanitized version was dispatched throughout the realm, printed in broadsheets and whispered by town criers, who spoke only of a dignified end, and a crown smoothly passed to the next heir. To reinforce this newly minted legend in the minds of the populace, the council arranged a funeral of grand simplicity. In the vast nave of Westminster Abbey, torches flickered against stark stone pillars as a small cadre of the highest nobles processed silently toward the Queen's tomb. There was no open casket, no viewing of the mortal remains. After a single prayer, the bier was lowered directly into its subterranean resting place, concealed behind heavy drapes of black velvet. No banners proclaimed her lineage. No public anointing or eulogies extolled her final sufferings. Merchants and commoners, curious and hushed, were herded away from the precinct, forbidden to linger or offer flowers. The ceremony lasted less than an hour, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps and the faint glow of candlelight on hallowed walls. Thus was the image of the Virgin Queen preserved, unsullied by the grotesque truths she had carried within. Portraitists continued to render her in unblemished alabaster complexion, clad in vibrant robes and crowned with a diadem that caught every reflected glimmer. Poets composed odes to her steadfast vigilance and unbroken chastity, invoking her as a symbol of Protestant virtue and national unity. Beneath this tapestry of homage, however, lay the silent knowledge of what had been hidden. The body that had birthed a legacy was also a vessel of misery and violation, its secrets sealed in mercury and lead. This elaborate subterfuge witnessed suppression, document destruction, tomb entombment, and public pageantry ensured that the transition of power to King James VI of Scotland, who ascended the English throne as James I, would be smooth and uncontested. The council feared that any whisper of Elizabeth's true condition might embolden Catholic sympathizers or opportunistic rebels, potentially igniting civil strife. By presenting an image of untroubled passage from life to death, they staved off unrest and buttressed the stability of the realm. Yet in doing so, they also enshrined one of history's most chilling conspiracies: a sovereign's body sacrificed to the exigencies of statecraft, her humanity interred alongside her reputation beneath layers of lead, mercury, and unyielding silence. It was under the newly crowned James I that the mantle of secrecy cast its longest shadow over Elizabeth's final resting place. From the moment James ascended the English throne in the year 1603, the policy of unbroken silence was upheld with near religious fervour. Despite occasional entreaties from scholars, physicians, and even foreign dignitaries to open the tomb and subject the remains to scientific examination, each petition was met with a steadfast refusal. The official rationale: preserve the tomb's integrity, respect the sanctity of the deceased, was repeated in dispatches and proclamations, yet it carried the weight of a carefully concealed fear that any probe into the Queen's physical remains might expose the horrific truths hidden beneath her lead and velvet shrouds. As centuries passed, the whispers grew louder even as the tomb remained sealed. It was not until the 20th century that non-invasive technologies such as ground-penetrating radar offered a glimmer of possibility. In 1950, a preliminary GPR survey of Westminster Abbey revealed anomalous reflections. Layers of dense material far thicker than masonry, numerous void spaces suggestive of hidden chambers, and possible signatures of metal-iron chains or perhaps coal-like inclusions wrapped around the coffin. A second survey 2 decades later confirmed these findings, but again, all calls for a detailed investigation were denied. The Abbey's custodians and the British government insisted that to disturb the tomb would risk irreparable damage to a national monument, cloaking the truth in official reassurances. Meanwhile, historians and textile experts turned to the surviving relics of Elizabeth's court wardrobe housed in the National Collection. Corset fragments were meticulously analysed, revealing tightly woven fabric threads encrusted with microscopic particles of dried blood, animal fat, and infinitesimal lead dust. The stitching showed unusual reinforcement at the waist and bust, consistent with corsets designed to compress the ribs far beyond normal fashion standards. Chemical assays on shards of powdered makeup found in porcelain containers confirmed lead concentrations tens of times greater than levels known to induce acute poisoning. These findings painted a grim portrait. The Queen's body had been subjected to a regimen of chronic self-toxicity, enforced by garments that acted as both armour and instrument of destruction. At the same time, diplomatic correspondence, a trove of secret dispatches long locked away in foreign archives, provided further clues. Ambassadors to Elizabeth's court noted her unusually broad shoulders, her deep, husky voice, and the soldier-like firmness with which she carried herself. One envoy described her hands as large and strong, akin to those of a master sculptor, while another recorded subtle stiffness in her gait, as though her ribs or hips resisted the fluidity of natural movement. Though couched in polite language befitting the protocols of courtly respect, these observations hinted at a physique more robust and less conventionally feminine than the popular image conveyed by portraits. These strands of evidence, textile analyses, makeup assays, diplomatic memoirs, and radar surveys, began to coalesce into a hypothesis that would challenge every assumption about Elizabeth's identity. Scholars speculated that she may have suffered from a disorder of sexual development, such as complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, which would reconcile a female external appearance with ambiguous internal anatomy. Alternatively, the legend of the so-called Bisley boy gained new traction, that the real Elizabeth was replaced in childhood by a male heir, raised in secrecy to preserve a dynastic succession. Yet, despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, no full investigation was ever permitted. Instead, these fragmentary revelations trickled into academic footnotes and marginalia, published here and there in specialized journals. Historians debated the meaning of iron will and unyielding stature in contemporary poetry, considering them not as mere metaphors but as reflections of bodily realities. Medical ethnographies cited Elizabeth as a cautionary case of lead toxicity and extreme corsetry, a royal experiment in the lethal intersection of fashion and power. Yet each scholarly edition insisted on the caveat that definitive proof would require direct examination and impossibility under the prevailing mandates of preservation. Thus, the mystery endures. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, retains her aura of untouchable majesty, even as the evidence of her personal suffering and physical peculiarity looms in scientific readings and diplomatic accounts. The refusal to pierce the seals of her tomb stands as testament to a nation's unwillingness to confront the darkest sacrifice made in the name of sovereignty. Generations of researchers have peered through the narrow apertures of technology and textual analysis, only to find the final barrier unyielding. And so Elizabeth's legacy remains a delicate balance between legend and a truth too terrible to disturb, the sovereign enshrined in lead, the mystery preserved in silence. It was in the quiet hours of the night, when the court lay hushed beneath flickering candlelight, that Elizabeth's own pen became a mirror to her hidden turmoil. In verse and aphorism, she returned time and again to themes of masks and veils, an unsettling refrain that seemed to extend beyond mere metaphor. In one oft-quoted stanza she wrote, "I am not the one you see. This bodice is but a shell of 1,000 layers," suggesting that the pale, powdered visage and the rigid bodice she wore were more than political theatre. They were confessions of a truth she dared not speak aloud. Centuries later, historians of the mind would pore over these lines as though they were coded diaries, evidence of a psyche burdened by relentless secrecy. In the annals of what modern scholars term the history of personality disorders, they discerned in Elizabeth's words and actions the hallmarks of chronic dissociation. A woman so estranged from her own appearance that she forbade the presence of any mirror in her private chambers, fearing that a clear reflection might betray the mask she had constructed. Mirrors, emblems of regal self-possession in the Renaissance, were banished or shattered, replaced only by fragments of broken glass through which she would glimpse a fractured image of herself. In this performative isolation, she became something akin to a living portrait, flawless from a distance but unknowable up close, a sovereign both seen and unseen. Her courtiers spoke in hushed tones of how she moved through audiences with a measured grace, never allowing any subject to observe her beneath the layers of textile and paint. As one contemporary diplomat confessed, "To behold her in full view is to see an apparition, for the flesh beneath remains forever concealed." Oh, modern medical psychologists have ventured hypotheses that Elizabeth may have suffered from complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, or CAIS, a condition in which one's genetic and hormonal makeup diverges from conventional definitions of male or female. Under the influence of this theory, her externally female form might disguise an internal biology more complex than any 16th century physician could discern. Coupled with chronic lead and mercury exposure, each applied daily in powder and cream, this could account for the strange growths, the teratomas, and the aberrant tissues uncovered after her death. Yet, as tempting as such explanations are, they remain speculative. For the lead-lined sarcophagus that holds her remains has never been opened, its secrets sealed beneath layers of metal, and an unyielding oath of silence. Meanwhile, in the cultural life of England, Elizabeth's image attained a transcendent power. Poets, painters, and sculptors enshrined her as the Virgin Queen, a paragon of purity whose very essence was beyond mortal touch. In oil on panel, she was rendered with flawless white skin, a flawless mask never meant to crack in gowns of shimmering satin and ermine, clutching a gilded scepter or a sword tipped with jewels. In marble and bronze, her likeness bore the emblematic ruff and coronet, her stance eternal, unassailable, as though carved from the very rock of her realm. Musicians composed motets in her honor, their soaring refrains likening her reign to the dawn of a new age, each note reinforcing the myth of an unblemished monarch. Ballads passed from wandering minstrels to the hushed ears of country folk, each chorus pilfering a scrap of her legend. Her face, a moon of pearly white. Her heart, a flame that never wanes. Thus the popular imagination was shaped not by the secret horrors she endured, but by the ideals she embodied. Even the architecture of the era paid homage to this exalted facade. Stately homes and town halls erected stained glass windows, depicting her in resplendent robes, her visage radiant behind a halo of colour. Heralds and chroniclers spoke of the glorious majesty as a living saint, untouched by the ordinary frailties of flesh. The feast days in her honour, celebrated with banquets and pageants, reaffirmed her status as the unassailable steward of England's destiny. Yet if one reads her own poetry, her private reflections on the nature of disguise and self, one senses that beneath the public veneration lay a woman consumed by the very artifice she had perfected. Each painted cheek, each steel stay constricting her ribs, each whispered command that no mirror be brought close, existed not only to fortify her throne but to protect her from the terror of discovery. In creating the myth of the Virgin Queen, she had, in effect, imprisoned her body and soul within a fortress of legend, one that history would honour even as it obscured her humanity. And so, through the alchemy of art and ceremony, Elizabeth's memory endures. A queen whose true form lay hidden behind 1,000 layers, whose legend outshone the mortal woman beneath, and whose greatest triumph was not conquest of foreign foes, but mastery over her own terrifying transformation. In the annals of time, she remains the ultimate illusion, the sovereign mask that outlived the face it veiled. Whispers of the Bisley Boy legend fluttered through courtly corridors like moths drawn to candlelight. According to the tale, in the year 1529, when Princess Elizabeth was barely 3 years of age, a clandestine exchange took place in the dim hush of Windsor Palace. The true Elizabeth, pale and fragile, was spirited away under cover of night, replaced by a royal nephew or cousin, an infant boy raised in the guise of a princess. In this version of events, the child who would become Queen Elizabeth I was, in fact, the hidden heir of King Henry VIII's line, a male scion trained from infancy to navigate the perils of the Tudor court. Those who recounted the story spoke in hushed tones of the reasons for such a ruse, a desperate bid to secure the dynasty with a male ruler while preserving the veneer of a female sovereign. They pointed to oddities in Elizabeth's later years, the husky resonance of her voice, more akin to a soldier's commands than a lady's gentle lilt, the broad strength of her shoulders, visible even beneath sumptuous gowns, the measured stiffness of her posture, as though accustomed to military drill. Such anomalies, they argued, were artifacts of a boy raised beneath petticoats and lace, forced into the role of a virgin queen by the machinations of state. Though official historians have long dismissed these rumours as fanciful inventions, a handful of secret diplomatic letters dredged from foreign archives in the 19th century lend them an eerie plausibility. One French envoy's missive, encrypted in his cipher, recorded a whispered confession: "She is not the maiden you revere, but a youth in borrowed vesture." A Spanish ambassador, writing in careful Latin, remarked upon the uncanny firmness of her handshake and the unyielding ridge of her jaw. Such passages, uncovered only in fragmented codebooks, hinted at a scandal so explosive that it could unravel the very fabric of Protestant England. In the regal theatre of court, every detail of Elizabeth's public persona was choreographed to suppress these suspicions. She appeared upon a raised dais for audiences, her skirts billowing in concentric circles that concealed the shape of her legs and hips. Attendants were instructed to maintain a careful distance, lest any courtier glimpse the contours of her form or the slight curvature of her gait. The subtle tap of her shoes on the marble floor, the deliberate arc of her hand as she accepted petitions, each gesture was rehearsed by court protocol, designed to project an image of otherworldly grace. Within her private chambers, the illusion grew ever more elaborate. Walls were hung with tapestries depicting her in radiant white, her figure slender and ethereal. Mirrors were angled so that they reflected only the upper half of her body. A single full-length mirror was permitted, but it stood behind a velvet curtain, drawn only when absolutely necessary, and then only with a maid of unquestioned loyalty assisting. It was in these secluded moments that Elizabeth's attendants ensured her garments cocooned her completely. Corsets reinforced with whalebone hidden beneath layers of silk, farthingales extended with steel hoops to drown out any hint of her natural silhouette. Thus did the Tudor court orchestrate a masterful collaboration among visual art, ceremonial ritual, and medical subterfuge. Portraits painted by Sir Nicholas Hilliard captured not a woman but an ideal so pristine, so perfectly proportioned, that no living model could match the image on panel. Court masks and pageants further cemented the myth, casting Elizabeth in roles of goddess and allegory, draped in symbolic regalia that spoke of her purity and divine favour. Meanwhile, physicians whispered in corridors about the extraordinary lengths to which her court went to preserve her secret. The daily regimen of lead creams, the surgical precision of corsetry fittings, the hushed counsel that no physician ever speak of her private anatomy. It was in effect one of history's greatest natural disguises, a living, breathing enigma concealed by the combined arts of painting, performance, and pretense. Elizabeth I transcended her mortality to become an orchestrated legend, her body both shield and stage. For centuries, the world beheld a sovereign whose strength seemed forged from myth, never suspecting that underneath the silks and paints lay a secret that could shake the foundations of monarchy and faith alike. And so the Virgin Queen endured not merely as a person, but as a grand political, cultural, and scientific endeavour. Her reign was not just an era of stability and patronage, but a testament to the extraordinary lengths a state would travel to conceal its most intimate truth. In the end, it was the secret itself. The possibility that the figurehead of a nation was neither wholly woman nor wholly known that proved to be Elizabeth's most enduring legacy, whispered in shadowed halls long after her immortal image had been set in gold and marble. By the passage of 4 centuries, the elaborate concealment of Elizabeth's true condition had elevated her to a near-mythical stature, a figure so sacrosanct that no mortal dared question the perfection she embodied. Victoria's painters and Victorian historians alike portrayed her as the purest of monarchs, the Virgin Queen whose unblemished reign saw the founding of the English Protestant Church, the decisive overthrow of the Spanish Armada, and the first stirring of what would become the British Empire. In every history book, every stained glass window, and every sonnet penned in her honour, Elizabeth stood as the unassailable paragon of chastity and sovereign virtue. Beneath that radiant image, however, lay a body slowly succumbing to lead poisoning and the iron vice of her corset. Her organs, shrunken and necrotic, had resembled the husk of a noble vessel, its timbers rotting from within, even as her legend burned ever brighter. Had the truth of her ravaged anatomy been laid bare, the very foundations of her achievements might have crumbled. The religious settlement she orchestrated severing ties with Rome and moulding the Church of England into a bulwark of Protestant faith depended upon her personal sanctity. To reveal that sanctity as a carefully constructed artifice, built upon a diseased flesh and ambiguous biology, would have undermined every doctrine she had championed. Similarly, her military triumphs, including the famed defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, were attributed to her unwavering moral rectitude and divine favour. Yet if the Armada's route was won under the banner of a queen whose body had long since betrayed her, then the victories themselves might be recast as hollow, tainted by the very mortal reality she sought to transcend. Even the bloodlines she safeguarded would come under scrutiny. Elizabeth's vow of perpetual virginity prevented any husband, and by extension any heir, from laying claim to the throne. Had it been revealed that her biological fundamentals were neither strictly female nor wholly as advertised, then the entire question of succession might have been reopened, endangering the fragile stability of the Tudor and later Stuart dynasty. Marriage treaties, alliances cemented with noble houses across Europe, and the very legitimacy of her successor, James VI of Scotland, could have been challenged, plunging the realm into civil discord or foreign intervention. Such a scenario would have risked undoing the political tapestry Elizabeth had woven so meticulously. For these reasons, the suppression of evidence was treated as statecraft of the highest order. Witnesses were silenced, documents were consigned to flames, and even centuries later, the lead and mercury that sealed her coffin still stand as a grim deterrent to any who might seek to pry open her final resting place. The Abbey's custodians, invoking the sanctity of heritage, have consistently declined every appeal for exhumation or forensic study. They speak of preserving a national monument, of respecting the sacred trust between a people and their sovereign's remains. Yet beneath those solemn declarations lies the abiding dread that to disturb the tomb would unleash all the suppressed horrors that Elizabeth carried in life, and that by extension would call into question every triumph credited to her. Name. Today, Elizabeth lies entombed in a vault deep beneath Westminster Abbey, encased in dense lead, so thick that no and few dare even propose no instrument of modern science could penetrate it without defiling the sanctity of the site. Above ground, tourists mill about, cameras clicking, as they gaze upon her effigy carved in marble, the youthful features unmarred by time. They see only the perfected icon, a woman stone, a queen stone, neither knowing nor suspecting the tortured humanity entombed below their feet. The secret of Elizabeth's bodily transformation from a noblewoman to a figure both intersex and cloaked in lethal beauty regimens remains obscured. All that endures are the fragmented documents that escape destruction. A charred scrap here, a ciphered diplomatic dispatch there, a hushed recital of her own haunting verse about masks and shells. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have detected anomalies within the tomb, voids, dense metallic signatures, and echoes of chain-like structures, but these spectral readings provide no definitive answers. They stand only as metaphors for our yearning to know what lies behind the pristine pall of history. In libraries and lecture halls, scholars continue to pore over marginalia and relics, hoping to piece together a fuller picture of the woman behind the crown. Public interest waxes and wanes, driven as much by the romance of conspiracy as by genuine historical curiosity. Yet each new theory bumps against the same immutable barrier the lead around her coffin, the centuries of silence that guard her legacy, and the abiding respect for the corpse of a monarch whose myth has become inseparable from her memory. In the end, the Virgin Queen's dual triumph is both inspiring and unnerving. She fashioned an icon of unassailable purity that has endured for hundreds of years. Yet that very icon, so meticulously curated, rests upon a bedrock of secrets. Secrets of a body warped by ambition and obsession, of a sovereignty sustained by artifice as much as by statesmanship. And so, as candle flames gutter in the Abbey's dim recesses, her ghostly presence lingers. A queen both transcendent and tragically mortal, her final mystery sealed beneath lead and legend, sleeping on through the centuries. And so, having traced the contours of Elizabeth's public myth, sealed in lead and exalted in legend, we now turn our gaze inward, past the powdered mask and the ritual of pageantry, to the woman herself. Beyond the sovereign who wielded church and sword, there lay a child of the 15th century, a scholar at her desk, a companion in confidences, and a solitary spirit seeking solace in verse and prayer. What of the friendships that shaped her youth, the books that nourished her mind, the quiet pleasures that steadied her heart? In the pages that follow, we will lift the curtain on 4 intimate facets of her personal life: her early family bonds, her devotion to learning, her secret affections, and the daily rituals that sustained her, revealing the human woman concealed beneath the crown. The childhood years and the cross-shaped burdens of family left gentle, indelible marks upon the young princess, shaping her spirit long before she donned the crown. At the heart of her earliest memories stands her aunt, Mary Tudor, whose warm laughter and maternal care provided a rare solace within the imposing walls of Greenwich Palace. Mary, herself once a queen and then a princess deposed, took the little Elizabeth under her wing, guiding her through the labyrinth of courtly protocol and teaching her to navigate intrigue with grace. By candlelight in Mary's private chambers, the two shared whispered stories of youthful mischief and fragile hope, while outside the palatial windows, the Thames glistened silver in the moonlit currents. Elizabeth's playmates numbered among the most prominent children of the realm: Lettice Knollys, daughter of the Queen's cousin, and Margaret Douglas, grandchild of Margaret Tudor. With them she formed bonds that transcended rank, scribbling secret letters on scraps of parchment and exchanging trinkets hidden beneath the folds of their gowns. They met in secluded alcoves of the palace gardens, where rose petals drifted down like soft snow, and spoke in hushed tones of dreams beyond the high walls, dreams of riding free across green fields, or of one day wielding influence in matters of state. These friendships, woven in secrecy, would remain precious to Elizabeth throughout her life, a reminder of a world unmarred by political calculation. Yet even in her sheltered existence, Elizabeth could not escape the omnipresence of power. She once stood at her father's elbow, a silent witness to his grave judgment of her stepmothers. Henry VIII, towering and formidable, presided over the court as if it were his divine stage, dispensing both mercy and wrath with equal solemnity. The image of her father's stern profile, framed by velvet and gold, left a lasting impression. That authority was absolute, and that a ruler's word could reshape destinies in a single breath. In that moment, the seeds of her own understanding of sovereignty were sown, tempered by the realization that such power could be wielded with both generosity and terror. In contrast to regal observation, Elizabeth found solace and sometimes scandal in her youthful confidences. Lettice Knollys, her dearest companion, received love-worn letters sealed with delicate wax, studded with tiny, hand-painted initials. Margaret Douglas, with her keen wit and compassionate ears, became the keeper of Elizabeth's most private fears. The ache of loneliness when her mother's memory grew distant, and the bewilderment of a child thrust into a web of dynastic intrigue. These correspondences, exchanged under the cover of night, were a testament to Elizabeth's early grasp of the written word's power to forge bonds and to preserve intimacy against the tide of courtly spectacle. Yet the sweetness of these friendships could not shield her from the sting of betrayal. Among her earliest tutors and advisers was Thomas Seymour, a figure whose charm and ambition captivated the young princess. He spoke of the noble duty of service and whispered promises of shared power, inviting Elizabeth to confide her fears. But as Seymour's designs on the throne became apparent, his allegiance shattered like glass underfoot. The revelation of his machinations, plots that would entwine Elizabeth's fate with dangerous political schemes, taught her a harsh lesson in loyalty's fragility. From that betrayal, she learned the necessity of vigilance, that even those who professed love could covet her station, and that the heart must guard itself as carefully as the realm defended its borders. Thus did Elizabeth's earliest years unfold, framed by the tender guidance of her aunt, enriched by the laughter of secret friendships, sharpened by the awe of witnessing sovereign judgment, and tempered by the sorrow of a confidant's treachery. These impressions, soft as rose petals, sharp as a courtier's blade, wove themselves into the fabric of her character. Long before she would adopt the mantle of the Virgin Queen, she was already crafting the armor of her mind and the custodial walls of her heart, preparing for the day when she must stand alone at the center of a storm she could neither avoid nor wholly control. The passion for learning and the habit of reading became Elizabeth's sanctuary, a realm where the tumult of courtly life fell silent beneath the rustle of turning pages. Her personal library, modest by later standards but priceless in its contents, housed volumes in Latin of Cicero's orations and Seneca's moral essays, collections of Italian poetry by Petrarch and Ariosto, their verses offering both romance and reflection, and a King James Bible in English whose newly minted translations she found both comforting and challenging. These tomes, bound in vellum and leather, filled the shelves of her private study, their spines gilded with the lettering her own hands had traced in moments of quiet. Each morning, before the first rays of dawn tinged the sky, Elizabeth would summon her tutors and settle at a narrow writing desk beneath a tall, mullioned window. Thus began her daily study hour, a ritual as fixed as prayer. She commenced with grammar drills in Latin and Greek, parsing sentences with the precision of a logician. Next came theology lessons in scripture and doctrine that explored the nature of God's providence, alternating between English homilies and the patristic writings of Augustine and Jerome in their original tongues. Finally, a comparative theology session would pit Anglican articles against Roman decrees, challenging her to weigh arguments and form judgments. Central to these lessons was Roger Ascham, a gentle scholar renowned for his advocacy of the dialogue method. Rather than dictate, Ascham posed questions: why did Cicero choose this word? How might one reconcile this biblical passage with classical virtue? He encouraged Elizabeth to interrogate her beliefs and to articulate answers in polished Latin prose. In the flickering light of a single candle, their voices, teacher and pupil, danced between inquiry and response, each question gently nudging her toward intellectual independence. Other tutors, too, employed variations of this style, drawing her into spirited debate rather than passive memorization. After lessons concluded, Elizabeth often paused to commit her reflections to a small journal. Written in a tidy hand, her entries recorded not only the day's political news, dispatches from foreign ambassadors, reports of skirmishes along the Scottish border, but also her personal reactions. Surprise at the sudden death of a diplomat, admiration for a well-turned Latin phrase, or uncertainty over the ethics of religious coercion. These student-like notes revealed her restless mind, forever at work connecting events in the world to the ideas she had studied. Sometimes she interwove verses of her own composition, sketches of allegorical scenes inspired by Italian sonnets. Other passages took the form of prayers, beseeching divine guidance for her future duties. The margins of her notebook bore crossed-out phrases, as though she had agonized over every word, a testament to her conviction that precision of thought demanded precision of language. Throughout the day, Elizabeth's learning persisted in subtler forms. As she walked in the palace gardens, she would recite Latin hexameters beneath her breath, the names of poets rolling off her tongue like a secret litany. In private audiences, she tested foreign envoys with impromptu questions on history, catching them off guard with her facility in diplomatic languages. At mealtimes, she insisted on reading aloud selections from Tacitus or Plutarch, inviting her ladies-in-waiting to listen, and, occasionally, to challenge her interpretations. Her dedication extended even to leisure. During travels between palaces, she carried a foldable writing desk and a small selection of books in a leather satchel, reading by the glow of carriage lanterns. Servants learned not to disturb her in these moments, for even a soft footstep could interrupt her immersion in Augustine's meditations or Ariosto's romantic episodes. This relentless pursuit of knowledge served multiple purposes. It fortified her mind against intrigue, providing an intellectual fortress from which to judge treacherous courtiers. It offered solace during lonely hours when the weight of expectation pressed upon her shoulders. And it prepared her for the responsibilities she would shoulder as queen, equipping her with the rhetorical skill and moral discernment to govern a complex realm. As years passed and Elizabeth's reputation as a learned monarch spread across Europe, other princes and princesses sought her counsel in matters of statecraft and scholarship. Yet in the recesses of her journal, the recorded questions and insights of a young princess remained preserved quiet reminders of a time when her greatest ambition was simply to know, to understand, and to reflect. In those pages, the true Elizabeth lived on as a lifelong student, ever curious, ever humble, ever devoted to the transformative power of learning. The quiet affection and secret bond with Robert Dudley emerged as one of Elizabeth's most poignant and closely guarded attachments. Their friendship began in the gentle haze of youth, when Elizabeth visited Nonsuch Palace in the early 1530s. The newly embellished mansion, with its shimmering facades and winding gardens, became the setting for their first shared moments. Under the late spring sun, the princess and the young Lord Dudley slipped away from the watchful eyes of courtiers to mount spirited horses and canter along verdant pathways. The rhythmic clip-clop of hooves on gravel and the whisper of silk skirts in the breeze forged in Elizabeth's mind an association of freedom with Dudley's steady presence. As the years unfolded, those equestrian excursions deepened into confidences exchanged beneath ancient oaks. In one treasured letter, penned in a hand both deliberate and trembling, Dudley wrote, "My heart is set upon you," a phrase that would become legendary among those who glimpsed the intimate correspondence. Though the original missive never survived the passage of centuries, contemporaneous accounts refer to its bittersweet warmth. A short poem, attributed to Elizabeth herself, spoke of a single rose that blooms in midnight's hush, hinting at her own reciprocal affection, veiled beneath layers of courtly decorum. Yet for all the comfort of their shared rides and whispered notes, the pair could not escape the rigid demands of royal protocol. When Dudley's brother Ambrose, Earl of Warwick, was rumoured to seek a suitable bride for Robert. Court gossip swirled like mist over the Thames. Noble families vied to attach their names to the Dudley lineage, keen to elevate their own fortunes by securing a match. Some whispered that Ambrose would persist until Robert wore a wife's ring and assumed suburban estates, thus ending any hope of union with the Queen. These pressures rippled through Elizabeth's circle like a disruptive wind. Advisers cautioned her against indulging in private attachments, warning that even the hint of favouritism could inflame jealousies and threaten stability. Parliament members, under the guise of soliciting counsel, probed relentlessly for signs of her intentions, fearful that marriage might subordinate England to foreign influence or create factions at court. Through it all, Elizabeth maintained an outward composure as serene as a polished mirror. In public ceremonies, she adopted a delicate choreography of distance and dignity. When Robert Dudley stood among her gentlemen pensioners, he was positioned always at an angle close enough to catch a whisper, yet far enough to discourage idle speculation. During banquets at Whitehall, a subtle breeze from an open window might conspire to lift the hem of Dudley's doublet near Elizabeth's dais, drawing a pointed glance from her whose smile remained cool and impassive. Each gesture, each measured nod, became part of an unspoken ritual. She acknowledged him, but never in a way that breached the sanctity of her crown. Behind the scenes, their correspondence continued, though coded. Elizabeth instructed her secretaries to scrub overt terms of endearment and to cloak their sentiments in allegory references to constellations and wine-dark seas rather than direct declarations of love. She understood that her role demanded sacrifice. Personal desire must yield to public duty. Yet in the quiet solitude of her chamber at Hampton Court by candlelight, she would trace Dudley's name on a scrap of parchment, the letters a lifeline to her truest self. Despite the constraints, their friendship endured for decades. When Dudley returned from military service in the Low Countries, Elizabeth received him with a warmth that belied official restraint, a glance held fractionally longer than protocol allowed. In private audiences, she pressed him for news of his campaigns and consoled him over the loss of comrades, slipping into familiar Irish brogues to tease him gently. Yet always, their interactions ceased before familiarity could shade into impropriety. As the years pressed on and court factions sought to exploit every nuance of their rapport, Elizabeth mastered the art of managing affection with discretion. She granted Dudley honours a barony here, precedence there, but never the title of consort. She allowed him to stand in her presence at Westminster Hall, yet carefully arranged seating so that no lord or foreign envoy could infer anything more than platonic regard. This delicate balance preserved her sovereignty, even as it kept her heart tethered to a single friend. In the end, the story of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley stands not as a grand romance, but as a testament to the Queen's unyielding commitment to her office. Their silent devotion, expressed in stolen moments and coded verses, became a private covenant that neither ceremony nor scandal could undo. And though historians may forever debate the depths of their bond, the memory of those twilight rides at Nonsuch Palace and the whispered lines of a hidden poem endure as evidence of a rare intimacy, one that flourished in the quiet spaces between crown and council, between duty and desire. The solace found in art and daily rituals became Elizabeth's refuge, a gentle harbour for her weary spirit. Each fortnight at Whitehall Palace, a private concert would be arranged in the Queen's chambers, where lutes, ballads, and a consort of viols wove whispers of melody through the candlelit air. The musicians selected for their deft fingers and soft timbres played slow, lilting tunes that reminded Elizabeth of summer meadows and distant seashores. She sat upon a cushioned stool, her head leaning slightly as if in quiet reverie, allowing the harmonies to soothe the aches of her corseted ribs and the tremors in her hands. In those moments, time seemed to slow, the weight of statecraft lifting ever so briefly as each note dissolved into the hush of the stone walls. When she desired stillness of a different kind, Elizabeth would retire to her private garden, a sanctuary of rosemary and healing herbs, meticulously tended by her trusted gardener. There, among the fragrant rosettes of lavender and the slender leaves of sage, she practiced a form of silent meditation. As the morning sun filtered through willow branches, she would inhale the calming scents, her fingers brushing over thyme and lavender blooms. The ritual was simple yet profound, a slow circuit around the herbaceous beds, each step grounding her in the present, each breath a balm for a mind besieged by intrigue and duty. In that leafy retreat, The Queen found clarity and a sense of renewal that no courtly spectacle could provide. Even in the most exhausting of days, Elizabeth never neglected the ritual of bathing and skincare, a practice she regarded as essential to both comfort and survival. Despite her fragile health, she insisted on warm soaks, infused with distilled rosewater and barley flour, tonic mixtures believed to draw toxins from the skin. For 15 minutes or more, she would recline in a copper tub, attendants sprinkling petals and gently massaging her arms and shoulders to encourage circulation. After the bath, her skin was anointed with fragrant oils of almond and chamomile, applied with soft muslin cloths to soothe irritation left by layers of lead-based cosmetics. Though the process demanded additional hours, she welcomed it as a form of self-care, an act of mercy she permitted herself amid the relentless demands of the throne. As twilight fell and the corridors of Whitehall stretched long and silent, Elizabeth observed her evening devotions, a ritual as constant as the turning of the earth. Seated at a small oak desk in her private oratory, she opened a well-worn book of common prayer, its pages edged in gold. By flickering candlelight, she read psalms and litanies, her voice soft and measured, echoing off the stone. Each prayer was a plea for wisdom and peace, a measured cadence that settled the flutter of anxieties in her chest. At times, she paused to write her own short prayers in a blank margin, beseeching divine guidance for the trials that tomorrow would surely bring. Then, before retiring to her heavily draped canopy bed, Elizabeth would kneel upon a velvet cushion, hands folded, eyes lowered. For a final moment of solitude, she traced a simple sign of the cross and breathed a whispered benediction. "Grant me rest, O Lord, that my spirit may rise renewed." The hush that followed was profound. No page turned, no note strummed, only the soft sigh of her own breath. In that sacred pause, she found a measure of tranquility, a brief invitation for her soul to rest from the burdens of power and to prepare for the new dawn's inevitable demands. Through these arts and rituals, music that cradled her senses, gardens that healed her spirit, baths that cleansed her body, and prayers that quieted her mind, Elizabeth wove a tapestry of comfort around herself. Each practice, simple in its essence, formed a support beneath her regal mantle, reminding her that even a queen might seek mercy in beauty and devotion. In the faint glow of candle and moonlight, these private ceremonies whispered of a woman who, for all her titles and triumphs, cherished the gentle sanctuaries that allowed her to endure another day. And so, as the flickering candlelight dances its last across the vaulted ceilings of our shared reverie, we find ourselves gently drifting to the quiet shore of Elizabeth's world, one woven from silken veils, whispered confidences, and the soft echo of lutes that once soothed her restless heart. In the hush that follows, we are reminded that behind every legend lies a fragile soul seeking comfort in beauty and ritual, that even the greatest power may be tempered by the gentlest of cares. Perhaps the truest message of her story is this: that the human spirit thrives not solely on grandeur or triumph, but also on the small acts of tenderness, the private concert in a candlelit hall, the quiet meditation among fragrant herbs, the soothing warmth of a well-tended bath, and the steady cadence of whispered prayers. These delicate moments, though fleeting, shape the contours of our inner lives, offering solace when the weight of the world feels too great to bear. In Elizabeth's carefully crafted life, we find a lesson for our own, that balance is born from the interplay of strength and vulnerability, that resilience grows when we allow ourselves both to lead and to rest, and that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always whisper its way to the surface. As the final shadows lengthen, let us carry forward the value of empathy, the courage to seek our own quiet sanctuaries, and the wisdom to honor both our public selves and our private hearts. Now, as your own eyelids grow heavy and the soft cadence of your breathing matches the quiet rhythm of dusk, imagine the garden paths of Whitehall fading behind you, the strains of the viols dissolving into a gentle breeze, and the Queen's whispered benediction mingling with your dreams. Let the world outside recede, replaced by the calm warmth of your blanket and the gentle promise of rest. And as you surrender to sleep's embrace, know that we are grateful for your company on this journey through memory and myth. If you have lingered with us until this final sigh, we invite you to subscribe, so that in the nights to come, you may return to hear more stories that soothe the soul and stir the heart. Good night, and may your dreams be as soft and tender as a whispered lullaby.